If you're trying to find the next hot stock, there is one very important thing that you have to focus on. In this week's Market Minutes, I will explain what that is and, of course, do my regular weekly market analysis, try to figure out where the stock and commodity markets are going, where crypto is going, where the US dollar, and perhaps even inflation and interest rates. We'll talk all about that coming up. So what is a hot stock? Well, it's the one that you wish you would have bought, of course. It's the stock that can move up dramatically faster than the overall market. And they are characterized early in that move by something very simple, and that is abnormal activity. Now, I use statistics and a computer to measure that, so I always like to say statistically significant abnormal activity. And it starts with abnormal volume. I'll show you a couple of examples in just a moment, but it's the stocks that trade with abnormal volume that make stronger than expected price gains that you should put your attention onto. You want the stocks that surprise the market with this strength. If they've been doing it for a number of days already, the bus has kind of left the station. But when you have a stock that nobody cared about yesterday, and then it comes alive today with abnormal volume, it's usually because there is something significant going on in the company. It could be a rumor, it could just be stock promotion, it doesn't matter. Those are the things that can make that stock move up dramatically higher. And so you see here on screen, we call these alpha stocks. They're characterized by very abnormal trading volume, strong price gain, and they're highly liquid. By liquid, I mean they trade very actively. The number of trades is quite high. And what that ultimately means is that they trade on their own story with little correlation to the overall market. Now, this is a stock that I'll review later in the video as a day trade from this past week. But what I want you to notice here is just how abnormal the volume was on Thursday compared to Wednesday. And the price movement was abnormal compared to normal. Then this stock went up about 400% in a very short time period. Now, they're not all necessarily for day trades. We can do this for longer term trades as well. Notice the yellow dots here. Those yellow dots are my indicator that looks for abnormal price and abnormal volume. And so I created that indicator. It's on Stockscores, as well as an indicator I make available to my students who want to use it in TradeStation, which is a program for traders. If you have TradeStation and you're my student, you can plot these little yellow dots on your chart. The pink dots mean it has abnormal price movement, and the yellow dots mean that it has abnormal price and abnormal volume. We call that an an action candle. And you can see on this stock, BYSI, which had a big run here in a very short amount of time, it started the move with alpha. It started the move with a yellow dot, which is the action candle. And ultimately that stock almost tripled in just a few days. All right, so the key, if you want to find these alpha stocks, is look for stocks that have abnormal volume and abnormal price movement. The Stockscores market scan will do that for you. We have a scan that seeks out statistically significant abnormal price action. So the members of Stockscores can do that. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through a lot of charts and just try to find those. All right, let's get into this week's market analysis as we always do. We'll start with the S&P 500 chart, SPY. You can see the downward trend line that we've talked about for many weeks. It's intact, but we have that all-important rising bottom as we stall at the trend line, and hopefully we'll manage to break out through it. It may take a week or two. We may pull back a little bit, but the fact that we've been building that rising bottom is an optimistic sign. Let's take a look at the 1 month chart just to see what happened in the shorter term. And you can see that we had some weakness midweek, bit of a sell-off there after a nice little upward move, but that didn't last very long, and we actually rebounded quite nicely on Friday. That should bring prices back up to that resistance level maybe on Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll see if we can ultimately break out through it, or are we going to roll over and that long-term downward trend line holds up. So we have two scenarios that you have to watch for because it's hard to know which is going to happen. I would say
probably more likely that we're going to break that downward trend line. That's the feeling I get from being in front of the screen every day. But until it happens, you can't get optimistic. So when it happens, time to get optimistic. Until it happens, stay fairly cautious. All right, let's take a look at the Canadian market now, T.XIU. And this is the 3-year chart to start us off. And you can see a sort of a head and shoulders bottoming pattern building here. You've got the shoulder, the head, the shoulder, and you're just at the neckline starting to break through it. That should take prices back up to those highs. So things looking fairly good there. Looking at the 1-month chart, you can see the bottoms are rising, the buyers are in control in the short term, and that's largely because of gold, which is doing quite well. There's lots of mining companies on the Canadian stock market, and so they're doing well. One of the leading sectors in the market right now. And there you can see on the daily chart of gold moving up nicely. If we look at the 1-month chart, it's also in that upward trend. Trend started a few weeks ago, so I think it's more of a hold now than it is a buy, unless you're maybe a day trader or something like that, where you can trade some of the shorter term volatility. But on the 3-year weekly chart, you see that we will come into some resistance soon. We're getting close to that. And once we get up to that 185 zone on GLD, I expect we'll see a little stall and perhaps go sideways for a while. One of the contributing factors to gold going up is the US dollar going down. And there you see the daily chart of the US dollar, fairly weak. Looking at that 3-year weekly chart, you can see we are getting back to the long-term upward trend line, and we're just trying to fight there at that long-term upward trend line. Haven't really made a break of this pullback yet, so I'm still fairly cautious with gold, or pardon me, the US dollar going even lower. Now, another thing that contributes to the US dollar is, or pardon me, another thing that the US dollar contributes to is oil. We've actually seen oil come up the last couple of weeks, still in this daily downward trend line. So you've got a lot of mixed pictures here, because if we go to the 1-month chart of oil, you see the bottoms are rising. It's neutral to maybe a little bit optimistic. Go to the 3-year weekly chart, and you can see that that long-term upward trend line has held. I've talked about this in recent weeks. We keep bouncing off of it, and now we're starting to inch higher. So it may be that oil is going to stay in that long-term upward trend. Now, if I draw a trend line across those tops, that's the first zone of resistance. So by resistance, I mean a ceiling price that's going to limit upside. When it gets up there, probably do this, but if we do something like that, then the upward trend continues. And if instead we roll over and break the upward trend line, then you get bearish. So this is negative, and this is positive, and that's what to watch for. Okay, let's take a look at Bitcoin, GBTC, which has done quite well in the last couple of weeks. If we look at the 1-month chart, you can see pretty good strength in Bitcoin, and so that benefits not only the cryptocurrencies, but also the miners. So Riot, RIOT, Hut, Hive, Mara, these are all companies that have done very well because of the resurgence in Bitcoin. But when we look at the long-term chart, you still see that it's got an uphill battle that it's fighting. It has broken this first little downward trend line, but there's no real rising bottom yet. So I think it needs to come up, pull back, build a rising bottom, and then start to move up again. So it's in the process of bottoming, but at this point, it's really just a short-term trader's rally, not a long-term situation just yet. All right, let's take a look at TVT to get a sense of interest rates. And you can see that on Friday, we actually had interest rates bump up a little bit, but we're still in this downward trend, and we're sort of flirting with support. So I think interest rates not looking likely to go higher. They may not go a lot lower, and this is the bond market's interest rates. But I think you'll start to see the banks drop their rates a little bit, not because the Fed is raising rates or lowering rates, but because the bond market has priced in all of what the Fed has done and may do, and expectations are now that they're going to start to slow. So that's a positive for the stock market, and it could be a catalyst for that long-term downward trend line on the overall market to be broken. So my outings or my outlooks then, U.S. stocks neutral on both time frames. There are pockets of strength. Small caps pretty good. A little bit of life in, well, of course, the mining sector. A little bit of life in biotech. Canadian stocks long-term neutral, short-term bullish. Gold bullish on both time frames. Oil, we're getting a little bit of a bullish sense in the very short term. Still long-term neutral, but it does appear to be trying to hold that upward trend line. US dollar neutral, long-term bearish, short-term. Bitcoin, I've raised my short-term rating to bullish, still neutral long-term. And interest rates neutral on both time frames.
All right, now on to the day trade of the week. This is an example of a stock that we found when looking for abnormal activity. I have algorithms and processes with my computer, some of which you see behind me here, which look through the entire US stock market for stocks that are behaving abnormally. And I can find them before most people because the computer does all of the work. And this is a stock that we found early in the day on Thursday this past week. You can see that the abnormal volume is right there, so we picked up on that in the first 2 minutes of the trading day. But then I look for a further confirmation, and we go back to that action candle indicator that I talked about at the top of the video. You can see the little yellow dot there and there and there. We don't want to buy every yellow dot. We want to buy the ones that are breaking pullbacks. So there you see a pullback, which is another indicator that I've created. It's called the Stockscores trend line indicator. And there you see another one. So this was buy point number 1, and this was buy point number 2. There was a pretty aggressive one there, but I don't typically take something where the pullback is so short. But you can see the result. The stock made considerable gains, moving from about $1 to almost, well, over $2 in just a few hours. And that was a great day trade of the week. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Market Minutes. I'd love to hear your comments. Do you look for abnormal activity when trying to find the next hot stock, or do you do something different? Leave a comment in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and most importantly, trade well.